So Seb, do you just want to quickly introduce yourself and a bit about
Yeah, perfect. Thank you both for inviting me. It's great to kind of get the first session with all of you, crazy, adventurous founders who are going out there and trying to change the world. So my background is I've started my own business in the past, and I built that up, and then I sold that to a company called Reward Gateway, which is where I ended up crossing paths with Purdy. I've done since then a whole bunch of different jobs working at generally fairly early stage businesses. I think Reward Gateway is the oldest business I worked at, which was about 7 years old. But seeing all the different stages of a business and how that goes. And then I've now landed at Sintra, where I'm now CTO there, which is a 40-year-old business, which is very different. And kind of I've got to learn all the different stages of product development, and really how you need to think as a startup, and also how you build great products. And I've built some good products. I've built some pretty rubbish products. I've built some products which are wildly successful. I've also built some products which no one was interested in, and no one had any desire for. So I've kind of made a lot of the mistakes that you guys will also make. I've also done some of the things that hopefully I can teach you about. So hopefully we can learn from both the good things that I've done and the mistakes that I've made along the way as well.
Fantastic. Should we start by talking about users, and when, in your experience, when you're at this stage and you're just building a product as an early stage founder, you start engaging with users, and best practice to do that in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you cannot underestimate how much time you have to spend with users on an ongoing basis. I think what often happens is people think of kind of user research and user testing as kind of like this activity you do once every so often when you've got a big new concept, etc. It is basically where a lot of it ends up falling down, because it doesn't become a habit. It doesn't become part of what you do every single week. So the best startup founders, the best product people, the best people who are building the best products, literally will be speaking to their customers 4 or 5 hours every single week, testing out ideas, interviewing them, understanding what their problems are, and testing concepts with them. The key thing you always got to remember is your customers will tell you what's wrong, but they will never, ever tell you how to solve a problem. And it's again, something that people can get wrong, is they ask, oh, how would you solve this problem? Terrible question. If they knew how to solve that problem, they would have probably already solved it themselves by now. So what you really have to ask is, how are you currently solving this problem? What tools do you use right now? And pull on threads and understand their current situation, understand their problems, understand their environment. If you can, in an ideal world, you want to actually go and see where they are in the environment when they're solving whatever problem you have. So, it may well be if it's a B2C product, you might need to follow some consumers around, or doorsteps people and go, okay, can you show me how you solve this problem on your phone right now? Whatever it is that you're trying to solve. So actually, one of the things we did in the past, which I've found quite successful, is was a B2B2C product, and the consumer part was really hard to drill into. So we used to just go out. We were based in Hammersmith. Go out and pick random people and ask them 2 or 3 qualifying questions, so that we made sure they were the right kind of profile that we were looking for, and say, do you have half an hour now where we can do something? We just drag them quickly into our office, go through a bunch of tests, and actually see how would they use this thing really in the wild? How would they actually interact with this thing? So genuinely, there's so many different kinds of user tests, and there's loads and loads of material online that you can go and find. But I think the key thing that I would like to get all of you thinking about is, how do I make speaking to my customers, no matter what it is I'm going to ask them, how do I make that a habit on the level of 4 to 5 hours every single week? There might be periods you want to do a bit more, and there might be a couple of weeks where you do a bit less. But when you ask that sort of question, it will make you work out all of the different questions of, well, how do I get access to that number of customers on a regular basis? Now, I can't give you the answers to all of those things, because you're all going to have a different customer profile. But there's really simple tools. People make it complicated. I found it really easy. You just create like a Google form, put an advert on Facebook, particularly if you're focusing on consumers, or put an advert on LinkedIn if you're targeting specific business customers. And you'll be surprised how quickly and easily people will sign up, particularly if you incentivize them with 20 quid here or there. So there's really, really easy ways to find the people, but you need to be asking those questions of basically, how do I do that on that regular basis? I know it's okay if you go back to some of those customers again and again, particularly if it's B2B, you have a limited pool of customers that you can target. Fair enough, I get that. But try to keep expanding that loop, but make sure you are just getting into that habit of talk, because it will change your viewpoint. And that's really important, because you get very one-dimensional very quickly, because you all started a business because you got some idea. You had something that came to you and said, okay, I think this is a problem. Maybe you've experienced it yourself. Maybe you know people have experienced it and you want to go out and solve that. You get very quickly on a solution. And if you're not constantly exposing that solution to people who are going to tell you why it's rubbish, then you're not actually doing your job of understanding whether your product's any good.
What type of questions are you asking during that time? Like, can you give examples of the questions that yield the most value to your product roadmap? And also, for people who are pre-launch, how should they be deciding who their users are, and what are the sort of numbers in terms of like users you should be speaking to that the founders should be targeting?
So there's quite a few different questions in there. So the sort of questions you ask, and there is a bit of an art to it, but it's just open-ended questions that get you thinking and understanding and putting yourself in the customer's point of view. The more closed-ended questions that we always like to ask is, do you like this, and things like that. Those are super invaluable questions, because actually people are nice. So people will tell you that your probably partly rubbish idea is amazing because they don't want to hurt your feelings. So you have to ask them really open-ended questions. What do you like about this? What don't you like about this? Draw out those things, because people will answer the question honestly if you don't make them think that they're judging you, they're judging the product. So you have to ask them those sorts of questions, but also you have to get into their head. So, how often do you experience this problem? When was the last time you experienced it? And people aren't very good at dealing in generics. So then you have to go back to the specific, and you go, okay, perfect. Can you explain to me when was the last time you experienced this problem? And then they'll tell you, and then you step through piece by piece. What did you do in that situation? How did you do it? Where did you go? Can you show me? If they can physically show you or share a screen with you or actually expose you to what they did in that situation and how they solved it, those are the sorts of things that they're gold dust. And what you'll discover is that you'll speak to 10 customers and you'll probably end up with 15 different ways to solve the problem, because even one person doesn't solve it the same way each time. But you'll then start to, through constant exposure, you'll start to draw those threads of similarity that go through all of them. And that's what you're really looking for is, okay, everyone solves it differently. Everyone has a different way of approaching it, but what is similar about this, and how important it is to them. And that's always the other key thing. You always should be questioning yourself, because a lot of businesses fail, particularly at the startup stage, because they're genuinely not solving a problem that's important enough or valuable enough to people to be solved. So a lot of what you're doing when you're speaking to customers in this early stage is not necessarily testing your solution. Yes, that's really important. You should be doing that. But you need to keep digging to make sure that what you believe is a really important problem is actually going to get anyone off their bum to do something. And so one of the key questions I do like to ask at the end is, great, we've got an early beta release program where we're going to get people to sign up and you're going to get access to this early. Can you please sign up? Like, how interested are you in signing up to this program now? The requirements on you will be X, Y, Z. So they're going to have to put in a certain amount of effort, because that is a really good way to actually go, if people will genuinely sign up to that, put their name down, sign up to it, it's a really good indicator that the problem you're solving is interesting to them. They know that you might not have the solution now, but they are willing to put the time and effort in to solve that problem. If you can't get users to do that sort of thing, that can be an early warning sign to you that it's not right. The other bonus to that is, if you can turn around to an investor and then say, I've already got 95 people signed up to the beta program, it's going to be much easier to get funding, because they're like, oh, okay, well, these people have already generated interest. They validated these things. So those are the two parts of it. Is A, it's for you, but B, if you can tell that story to an investor, it will completely transform that sort of conversation that you're able to have. I'm sure you asked me a couple of other questions, but I think I lost track along the way.
I do actually have a follow-up question. So I was just reading the book Build by Tony Fadell. He's the creator of the iPod and Nest home system, which I can't recommend enough to people. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. But one thing he was saying is he worked right before the dot-com bust on this hotshot company in Silicon Valley called like Magic Leap or something like that. And it had everything going for it, like top-tier talent, top-tier funding. And when they launched, completely went flat and like just no one bought the product. And so I'm curious, you said you built some products that have done really well, some not so much. Was there any signs in the initial user feedback before you launched it was an indicator on what would go well and what wouldn't? Or I'm just curious if everyone at the start is like, oh, this is great, as you were saying, people are nice.
So I suppose there are. I'm gonna try to think back through some of the things that were successful and unsuccessful. Yeah, I think it's one of the hardest possible problems to actually properly break down, because when it comes to product development, there is no replacement whatsoever for getting the product as early as possible into your customer's hands, and genuinely seeing how they try to interact with it and how hard they are willing to work through the problems that you have. So I did work in one company. It was mainly B2B focused, and it was about solving a cash flow forecasting for businesses, which all you guys are going to be super interested in, right? Because you're not got a lot of cash, you need to understand where it's going. But the reality was that it didn't really matter how brilliant we made the thing. The kind of people who needed to use it were too busy doing other more important stuff for their business than spending a significant amount of time managing their cash flow. So there was a fundamental mismatch between where people thought they would spend their time and when given the opportunity, people would spend their time. So how do you predict that? You probably, when you talk about it and you explain it afterwards, it kind of can sound obvious, but it's not, because it's never obvious before. So in that sort of situation, what didn't we do properly is we never really gave early enough access to beta products, and then focused relentlessly on engagement of that product, which was the key metric that we had to get good. And partly my fault, partly other people's fault. We got obsessed with trying to get more users on board to the product. Getting more users on board to that product was pretty much a pointless exercise, because no one really would use it and would continue to use it and would continue to go back. So it is very hard in those initial stages, because the problem is a big problem. The problem is worth solving. And the problem, if you speak to users, they would say, oh my God, I would love this tool. What we probably didn't do is go, how long do you spend on this problem right now? How long would you be willing to spend on this problem right now? And how much time are you willing to invest into solving that problem? And actually, I think if we have asked those questions, if you ask the hypothetical, probably they're going to give you a rubbish answer. If you ask the realistic of, in the last week, how long did you spend thinking about managing your cash flow? That probably would have told us more about how important it genuinely is to people. So if I think about what we missed during those things, is that sort of analysis, because it's really easy to ask someone, what would you do? And people are rubbish at predicting what they're going to do. I mean, completely useless. They have literally no idea. You can ask me, oh, how good are you going to be at organizing stuff? Oh, I'm going to be really organized. I'm going to do this. What did I actually do last week? It was chaos. So like that's the sort of thing. So actually drawing distinctions from what has happened in the past is probably the key to it, and trying to avoid getting sucked into the would you, could you, how would you envisage sort of question, because that is kind of the fool's gold road to trying to understand whether your product was successful. Products that are more successful, so I'm trying to think about a couple of those, but they genuinely solve a really, really painful problem that keeps people up at night. So, I worked at a company called Salary Finance. It gives loans to employees who otherwise wouldn't be able to get them. And it does it by the fact that it takes it out your salary versus taking it out of your bank. So you can get it at a much better rate. It was really clear, because you can literally put a page up and ask people, come apply for this loan for these reasons. And target them with that, and you would just get people flooding that page because people want that. So there are some really cool things you can do like that. So you can, you can do a full store test, you can do all those different things, but the kind of things people go, oh my God, if I had this, I would apply today. Can you build it for me? Like those, if you get that sort of reaction from people, then you know that you're really going along the right road, because people will genuinely get excited about the fact that you might be able to solve that problem for them. So those are the sorts of things that work versus things that don't. But within there, you're going to get it wrong, and you're going to, there will be people who you will tell you this is the most amazing thing since sliced bread. So that kind of goes down to the other part of all of this thing is talking to users is great, but the clear and most important thing is to spend as small amount of time as you possibly can in product development so that you can get a really, really early version of your product out into users' hands and then iterate as fast as you possibly can. Because you can speak to 15,000 users and you will learn 10% of what you're going to learn in the first week that your product is live. Like there's no hiding that. So realistically, talking to users and getting that habit is important because it will help you to build the right product. But the second the product is live, actually, that's the point you accelerate talking to the users. You talk to even more users. You talk to people who are actively using the product. You go and you interview them and you get that. And if you literally can't get in contact with any of these users, they don't want to talk to you and they're not using your product, then the clear signal is your product needs to get better so that people are more interested and people are more willing to speak to it and people are more willing to come and talk to you about it. So you get a lot of nice early warning signals like that. But yeah, the key is get the product out earlier than you think is possible would be the key thing.
I think we were talking about this with regards to Uber and Facebook, because everyone sees them as these huge, massive companies that have taken over the world, but their strategy for product development, iteration, and feedback was exactly what you were just saying, right?
Well, I think even within that, as a more key point, what they did brilliantly is they actually really restricted their user base so that they could focus on building the best possible product that solved a really, really, really tiny segment's problem. So just quickly tracing Uber, they actually started, as far as I understand, in one part of San Francisco, right? So they didn't even try and hit a whole city simultaneously. They went, we will hit one part of one city and we will build up both sides of our network to the point that this thing works. And then we will expand to more parts of that city until we can cover the whole thing. And then they've gone, right, we've done that. Then we can go city by city by city by city. What I think most people try to do, and just to go back to Facebook, so you mentioned it, Facebook started at Harvard and then they focused only, and they would only allow people from that university. And then they expanded to a few other of the top universities in America. And then they slowly went to other universities, and then eventually they opened it up to the world. And now everyone knows who they are and how amazing they are, and also how terrifying, but that's another story. But if they had gone, right, we're going to go full blast, we're building this thing that will solve everyone's problems, they would have completely failed. So actually, the trick to that is when you are thinking about your users, segment down to the smallest possible user group that you can. Ideally, particularly if it's B2C, right? If there's a network effect to it, then that becomes even more important because a network is extraordinarily hard to build. Like the vast majority of network products are going to completely fail because it is insanely hard to get people's attention, particularly in the world when you've got Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, and everything else. But whatever you do, segment on the smallest possible segment with the smallest possible problem that you can solve quickly, solve it, get people excited, and then expand out. So it's kind of, I think of it as going slowly to go fast. Whereas what a lot of people try to do is go fast, go big, and no one can get use out of it because they haven't been slowly walked into it. They haven't learned from all of these lessons, and you haven't developed with them. You've developed something big and vague. So that's a really, really good tactic for how companies work. So even on the B2B space, don't go, we're going to solve from 30 people all the way up to 30,000 people. Pick a segment, ideally pick a target category area. Is it manufacturing? Is it this area? Is it that area? And, going back to the cash flow business that we worked at, actually, we didn't do that targeting and it was much to our own mistake is we didn't segment down, we didn't target specific areas, partly because when I joined, we already had an enormous amount of VC funding, and the pressure was on to just grow. But the business itself hadn't put in the hard work before that point to actually build a sustainable base of customers that were using that product and that were interested. So that's another part of the whole thing. And I'm sure you'll talk about that, but getting too much VC funding too early in your journey can just as easily kill a business as not getting enough. In fact, probably more easily and more quickly.
A quick reminder for everyone to put their questions in the chat, because we will go to Q&A shortly. So you can either put your questions in the chat, or you can use the little raise hand feature too. A question I had was, when you're speaking to so many users or potential users, you get all these different bits of feedback. Sorry, Party, I just like scratched you. How do you bunch it together, or like, how do you know what to prioritize? Do you create any like quantitative metrics based off of the qualitative metrics? And then how do you know which feedback you should ignore and prioritize?
So this is where, unfortunately, I'll do a lot of hand waving and a lot of references to insight and basically trying to understand what you're doing. If you try to quantify research like this, that is a really brilliant way to completely devalue the whole process. So I think what people like to do, people love to be able to look at a list of features and go, this one has a score of 97, this one has a score of 79, therefore I'll work on the thing that has a score of 97. And people also love to take all these conversations that they have and try to synthesize a really simple answer out of them. Actually, half of the point why you need these really high value conversations that give you lots of information that doesn't fit neatly into a survey is it's about immersing yourself into the customer journey. It's about really deeply understanding their problem. So if you really want to do some analysis, the jobs to be done methodology is a really, really nice way to do it. So there's a great book by Clayton Christensen. I can't even remember what it's called. But if you Google Clayton Christensen job to be done, you'll find it. And that methodology is widely used in product development now. And the reason is it gives you some kind of structure to try to pick out what are the key things that are coming out of your research without, in my opinion, resorting to things that just don't work. So trying to put a number or trying to say, oh, 7 people requested this feature, therefore now it's the most important thing. But actually, all of 7 of those people might have been like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'd like that. But they didn't actually get excited. Whereas you might have had 47 conversations, but 5 or 6 of those conversations where the person got really excited and really went on about a particular area and how important it was. And you felt that same excitement, not with everybody because they don't get all excited, but you felt that same excitement across several different conversations. It is you being a human being and exposing yourself to that will drag those pieces of information out. Yes, you should absolutely document what that conversation was. You should write it up. You should do all those sorts of things. But the key thing is immersing your brain. It's kind of like dump your brain in a vat of customer knowledge. And then eventually your brain will, if you spend the time and you think and you read and you understand and you dwell on it and ideally record it and you re-listen to it, then you will slowly but surely pick out more of those things. There are so many techniques you can use as well. You can write post-it notes and you can do lots of stickers and you can come up with really cool things. And to be honest with you, if you really want to know about those techniques, have a Google how to research those. But I think for me, the key thing is when you immerse yourself really deeply into what the customer wants, it actually becomes quite easy to pick out what the key insights are, because it just becomes, this doesn't work because of blah. And you don't know what that thing is going to be. And it's always surprising. And it's often, you don't need 37 people to say something. You can see it from one person. Someone opens up your app or your website or whatever it is you're building, and they get stuck. You don't need to test with 10 more people. You know immediately that person has got stuck, that they're not an idiot. So don't assume that the person is an idiot, which is a really easy thing to do. You should assume that your product is rubbish and that it needs to get better, because all of our products are rubbish when we first launched them. Fact, unfortunate. So you do that thing, someone gets stuck. That one interview has told you, I need to fix the user onboarding. Fine, you now know that. Maybe there's a simple step, and there's a whole bunch of prototyping techniques, etc. So I think someone was mentioning there, you can use Figma, you create the prototype and test the prototype, you don't test the product, and you can iterate that. So again, really formal user research methodology would say you test the same prototype with 5 or 10 customers so that you can gather all of these things. The reality is if you find that something is rubbish on your first run through, there is no point retesting that rubbish prototype with another 4 people for them to all tell you that it's rubbish. Fix the problem, run it again. The whole run it with 5 people thing is when it starts to go that your prototype is actually decent, and now you're looking for how do I really make it amazing. Then you test it with 5 people, you improve it. You test it with another 5 people, you improve it. But each time someone tells you something really glaringly obvious that you realize is immediately wrong, don't go, well, I'm rigidly stuck to testing the same prototype with 5 people. Otherwise, my research isn't valid. We're not scientists here, guys. We're trying to build a business. And building a business is about responding to those sorts of things. So that's kind of how I think about those things.
Awesome. We're going to just ask one more question, then we'll go to Q&A. We've got good questions coming in on the chat. This is actually for probably week 3 for the people in our program, but building for stickiness. Do you have any great tips on how to get that user engagement that you need, have people keep coming back using products again and again, or things to look out for when you acquire users and then you just lose them straight away?
And can sorry, one other question. Can you also define product market fit too?
Good. Bloody hard question. I'm going to come back to the product market fit one afterwards. So how can you make a product sticky? There's probably as many ways to make a product sticky as there is a product. And also, I guess the question is does your product need to be sticky is always a first question that you do need to ask. So not every product needs to be sticky. There are some products that are kind of one-hit wonders. There are some products that are primarily driven B2B to C, for example, where the C part needs to be sticky, whereas the B part needs to be that the person isn't going to tell you to bugger off. So there's a whole range of things. So the first thing to actually work out is what's actually important that you need from users for your product. And don't just blindly follow that engagement is the key driver, because engagement is the key driver for Facebook, for example. But actually, for example, with Uber, it isn't regular engagement, it is how many repeat trips do you get? So you need to go back and you need to actually work out what is the definition of what you're trying to achieve. And then really, it's quite simple, you just experiment. There's no formula for what things are going to be sticky and what things aren't, because gamification can be really useful, but it can also massively bloat your user interface and confuse users. So it might work in some cases, it won't work in others. And the sad truth is it's all about run as many experiments as you possibly can, as quickly as you possibly can, if you're chasing that sort of stickiness target. If you want a book to read on that stuff, read Growth Hacking, amazing book. I imagine a lot of you have probably already read it, but if you haven't, read Growth Hacking. It talks all about how do you do that stuff and where should you be focusing and how do you actually solve those problems. For me, it's the best book on that world that you can possibly come up with. And the question on product market fit, well, actually, in Growth Hacking, they have a really good definition of product market fit. And I think it was something along the lines of, if 40% of your customers are saying that they would be extremely disappointed if your product no longer existed, that's how they define product market fit. I think more broadly, it's about, it's sometimes almost hard to put into words, and which is why it's a really hard thing to define. Generally, product market fit is you will know it when you have it, and you will know it when you don't have it. When you have it, you will have people coming to your door wanting that product. The sale, if it's B2B, you go to customers, they open the door for you, they're interested in that thing, and they say yes with a really high volume, and then they stay. No, those things are really clear. When you don't have product market fit, each sales conversation is hard. Each new user to acquire is hard. Each time you acquire a user, they bugger off. Like each one of these things is really hard to understand. So I don't have a clear definition other than the one taken from growth hacking, which I think is a really nice survey test that you can do to give yourself some reassurance that you've got product market fit. But basically, I think genuinely, you should always be asking yourself the question, does it feel like we've got product market fit right now? And if it feels like each one of those things that you're doing is hard, that people aren't staying, that getting a new person is difficult, that people aren't coming to your door because they've been referred by other people. If none of those things are happening, you probably haven't got product market fit. So that is, I think it's a slightly more nuanced way to think about it. But if you want a clear measure, then take that measure from the growth hacking book and Google what the exact answer is. Run that survey, run it on a regular basis. I think it's a good practice to do. And that's also a good way, because as founders, you're going to believe that your product is better than it is. And so you're going to be wanting to believe you've got product market fit before you actually do have product market fit.
Awesome. So we got about 20 minutes left. If you've got a question you want to ask Seb directly, use the raise hand feature on your Zoom account. And until then, we'll just run through some of the questions that have already come in on the chat. Was there anyone to ask first?
Yeah. Well, this was actually just about the book. Is the book, is it Hacking Growth by Morgan Brown and Sean Ellis?
That's the one. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Okay. Hacking. I got it the wrong way around. Hacking growth, not growth hacking. Sorry about that.
No, it's good. We put all the links in the email that goes out to the founders afterwards, and I know some people ask about that. So perfect. Okay, first question is from Rishi. But if you are going B2B and you don't have relevant contacts in corporates, how can you get in touch with them?
LinkedIn is brilliant, right? LinkedIn is an open network. So you need to understand who it is that buys your product. So actually, often the first stage in a B2B discovery is, if you don't have contacts, it means you don't probably know who buys your product yet. Then actually you're going to need to go and you're going to need to speak to people and go, who makes the freaking purchasing decision over this stuff? That is going to be your first problem to work out. If you actually then have worked out who typically makes the purchasing decisions in companies, then you need to start targeting those people on LinkedIn, reaching out to them with personal messages, buying LinkedIn advertising to kind of try and target them. Get in touch with some of those people and do that. Go to networking events, go to anything that you can where those people hang out and get to know them. If you can reach out to one person or bring someone into your business who has those contacts, that will also be worth its weight in gold. So, actually, if you're a founder trying to target a particular industry and you have zero contacts in that industry, your job is going to be infinitely harder. So I would also say, as a founder, I'd encourage you to go out and try and find someone else to come and join you who does have some of those contacts, because it will make you'll increase your probability of success by probably a factor of 3 or 4. And those contacts are hard to build. So there's 2 parts to that. Is, target them on LinkedIn is probably the easiest way, and at networking events, but try and bring another founder in if you can.
We also have an entire session. Is it this Thursday or next Thursday? Next Thursday with the founder of Street Bees, and she's going to be talking about how to do beta when you're selling to corporates. Okay, next question. We have 2, which I'm going to try to batch together around pricing. So one person said, what factors affect whether or how much you charge for your beta? And then another person, oh no, where did the question go? They said they have a wait list of around, 600 active members, and 40% want to pay for the product. So what ideas, or is it ideal to charge the users for the beta, and how would you assess those numbers?
Well, those are both really hard questions. So what affects the price of any product is really, it's a bit of a mystery to almost everyone. So actually, in where I am right now, it is really hard for us, even though we've been in business for 40 years, to work out what is the right price that people can pay. And it really depends on your users. So if you've got 600 users and 40% are willing to pay, then actually they say they're willing to pay, but actually you've got a brilliant opportunity. You've got about 250 people, and you could probably run 4 or 5 different prices at those groups and see which ones stick, and see where that goes and see what they got. So that is half the point of any kind of beta test, is what people pay. Now, do you actually need to charge them during that thing? No. Could you get them to sign up to a future price that they don't get billed right now? 100%, because actually getting all your billing infrastructure together, doing it effectively, if it's on a recurring basis or whatever else it is your charging model, that can take quite a long time. But getting someone to agree to a price in the future and then saying, but you will get X number of weeks, months, or years, or however you want to do it for free, then that's also fine, because people will get annoyed if they are paying for something that's rubbish. So that is one thing to be careful of, is if you're going to charge people and you're charging them a significant chunk of money and your product isn't really there yet, then actually they will get quite annoyed. So I would go, right, blimey, you're in a good spot. You've got 600 people, 250-ish of them are willing to pay. Then test out your pricing, give them different options, see what works, and just treat it as a series of experiments, because everything in your business is an experiment, and you'll find that out. And yeah, don't charge huge amounts for a beta unless you're really confident you've actually solved the problem. If you don't think you've really solved the problem, then I would generally get someone to commit to a future price, but not charge them, because charging them at that stage is a really good way to annoy people.
We've got 2 questions from the group, and then I'm going to ask the question about marketplaces, because there's been a few questions on that. So Arjit, do you want to go first, and then we'll go to you?
Hi. This is a question that I've already put in the chat, so you could skip that when you come to. Seb, could you give some examples of good open-ended questions and bad examples of open-ended questions to be asked to users during user interviews?
Okay, so bad open-ended questions. So bad questions are closed questions. Anything closed is generally bad, unless it's a closing question. So if it's a closing question where you're trying to get someone to buy, you quite often want a closed question that they can say yes or no to. Bad open-ended questions are very theoretical. So what would happen if we could do this for you? How would you feel about all of these things? Good open-ended questions are open-ended but specific. So what do you see when you look at this page? What do you immediately think when you look at this page? How do you solve this problem right now? How important is it to you? But also then get, I kind of talked a little bit about it, but get very, very specific. Okay, when was the last time that this problem happened to you? Because people will often in the abstract say that something is very important. And then you go, when was the last time it happened? And you go, oh, probably about 9 months ago. And then you go, holy crap, red warning signs. So you get really specific. When was the last time it happened? Okay, can you think back to that time? Yeah. So what happened? Guide me through it. And then really go into detail. So unfortunately, it does mean, like, basically how I find most customer interviews is you have a set of questions that you start with, that you write out, that you plan out. You ask a question, a customer says something, and you just pull on the thread. They're going to give you threads, and your goal is to pull on that thread and keep finding something out. So if they say something remotely interesting that's new or gets your interest, go as deep into that as you possibly can. So like I said, ask, oh, okay, how could you demonstrate to me how you solve that problem? Oh, let me show you. And then they can show you. So ideally, you want to even get to that point where they're literally showing you that stuff. So open-ended questions should be very, very specific, very situational, very grounded in the reality of what has happened and how they have done stuff in the past, and try to avoid as much as you can, unless you're coming to the, I want you to sign up to a beta thing, all of your predictions about the future, because like I said, predictions about the future from anybody are basically worthless because people have no clue what they're going to do.
Can I just ask really quickly, we've talked a lot about kind of customer interviews and spending 30 minutes asking those kinds of questions. What is your opinion on sending out a survey or something? Would you say that value in sending out a survey, or you do that first and then you pick 5 people and interview them in more depth, or should people focus more on having like longer conversations with a smaller group of people?
I think surveys are really difficult to get anything valuable out of, if I'm honest with you. I've done it loads of times, and I think it's the difference between finding out information and giving yourself a pat on the back. So in the survey, so actually, let me take it back. If you've got a very specific question, e.g., I want to find out product market fit, I've got a very well-defined question that I need to get 40% on, and it's kind of tested and been examined by people in the past, send out a survey, get people to answer the very specific questions that's not really created by you, and you are going to find out whether you have hit some specific goal, which will help you to understand where you are as a business. So that is a valuable use of a survey. But generally, 90% of the insight you're going to get is through that conversation where you pull in and you understand it. Survey doesn't really bring understanding. Survey brings validation. So use a survey to validate situations that you think you already know. Use user insight to actually uncover and understand what's really going on.
Ewan. Ewan, do you want to take yourself?
Hey,
Yeah.
one, I just checked out your website, and can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Or yeah, okay,
yes,
great.
Yes,
yeah, first off, I just checked out your website, and I'm definitely going to be joining in the near future. Market fit. Whenever I do talk to the bar manager, I tend to get a pint on the house, or at least like an industry. I tell them what I do, so that's there. But those conversations last, a good hour and a half sometimes. So to be able to metric that to then show to investors, and I actually have a meeting tomorrow, so this really helped me out today. How would you metric a conversation like that to then put it onto a plate for an investor?
So if I'm putting it on a plate for an investor, I would metric the number of conversations I'm having, the length and depth of those conversations, and the key insights that you have learned and the changes you have made as a result of those conversations. So a sophisticated investor won't want you to say 73% of people want this feature, because that is not the point of your conversation. What you are metricing is the fact that you're doing it, the fact that you are doing it in depth, and then the fact that you're actually responding to that information. If what you're doing is having a load of conversations and then freaking ignoring them, that's not valuable. If you're having a load of conversations and then you're making changes to your product, changes to your business, and adapting what you're going to do, then as an investor, they're going to go, this person gets it. This person understands what they're trying to achieve through those user interviews. So that is there. So if your goal of a user interview is to understand more so that you can change your business, then what you have to demonstrate is that you understand more and you're changing your business. That for me is the key. So if you can demonstrate that, then that will be, in my opinion, a huge tick in most investors' box, because they're like, these people get it. They're not giving me arbitrary statistics. I mean, investors do love a statistic, but actually you have to avoid letting them think that everything is a statistic, because it's not. But if you can demonstrate that, then a good VC investor who's going to be a good partner for you will actually go, yes, you've got it. Fantastic. That gives me a lot of confidence that you're going to build the right product, which is what the whole point of that user interview is.
Awesome. There's a few other questions that have come in on the chat about whether to send pitch decks or one pagers, and how to present this information to investors. I'm just going to say on Thursday, when Stephen Millard comes in from Notion, that's exactly the kind of questions that he's going to answer from the investor side of the table. So Notion, they've actually released a white paper on the benefit of customer feedback as part of your investment strategy. And he's going to talk about that in a lot of detail. So I'm going to save some of those questions for then. And then Seb, last question for you is about marketplaces. So if you've got either a marketplace or you're selling B2B to C, how do you then do that customer insight? If you're B2B2C, do you start with the consumer, take all that, and then go to the business? Or do you have any best practice that you can share?
Okay, so the tactics of the marketplaces and the tactics of B2B2C are quite different. So generally in a marketplace, if I address that first, generally there's an easy side and there's a hard side in most cases. So for example, with Uber, the hard side is actually getting the drivers. It's much harder to go out and recruit drivers who are on all the time. So you need to focus your initial efforts on how do I get the hard side solved. But then the second you start solving that, then the other side becomes a problem. So you end up in a constant loop where you have to understand that. So from a research point of view, you have to understand both sides, but you should always have an opinion on what you think the hard side is, and focus most of your marketplace research effort into how do I understand that hard side. And that will demonstrate that you're thinking properly about your marketplace and that you're thinking properly about how to bring those pieces together. On a B2B2C model, the it depends on the specific model that you go for. So some B2B2C is genuinely B2B2C, which means it's actually all the revenue comes from the consumer. But a lot of B2B2C, yes, the consumer does something, but actually the business is the one picking up the tab. So I don't think it really takes too much brain power to work out. You have to work out where your money is coming from and focus most of your energy onto where your money is coming from. But with B2B2C, you always have to remember that if you cannot convince a business to engage with you, you're dead. So it doesn't really matter how good your consumer research is. If what you're selling does not work for the business, it really doesn't matter. So it's a tricky problem, but 9 times out of 10, I think the business is the bigger hurdle. And then once you open it up, then as long as you're actually solving a problem that's useful, then the C will come along, but it won't come along in the kind of volumes that anyone really hopes. Because generally engagement with B2B2C apps is much lower than people expect. You know, if you're getting above 15% engagement on any B2B2C application, you're actually doing phenomenally well. So those are the sorts of metrics that you need to understand, and actually try to think about your business model in a way of, if I can convince the business and I can convince them to pay, then it gives you much more time to solve the consumer part of that problem. Because actually B2B2C businesses get quite complicated quite fast, because how do you communicate with those end consumers? It generally has to involve leveraging the business. So you really need to build something that is amazing with the business, and then each communication channel to each one of those consumers is cheap, but requires a new way of thinking. So you're not just going to go on Facebook, advertise those people. You're not going to go to Google Ads and start spamming them there, because you've got a really cheap way to access them, which is through the business. So then you need to develop all of your ways to get those people on board and to leverage that business. So generally, probably with a B2C, it's going to be 50-50 in terms of your research, but actually you have to remember that in the end, if you can't convince the business to do it, it doesn't really matter how amazing it is from a consumer perspective. If you can convince the business to do it, you probably will have at least a couple of years after the business signs up, particularly if they're larger, to actually convince the consumer that this is valuable for them. So I would focus more of my energy on the business than on the consumer, at least at first.
Awesome. 2 very quick fire questions.
Yes.
1, what's your views on product launches?
I'm not really sure they're valuable, if I'm honest with you. I think they're an ego boost rather than a driver of that. If you're targeting producty people and developer-y people who are going to use that product, yeah, it's probably got some value to it. If you're not, then it just makes your ego feel good that it's gone on product hunt.
Question 2, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn, add me there. And also I'm happy for you to share my email. If anyone wants to reach out to email me, then that'll be fine.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much,
Seb.
Everyone stick around. A few things to go over, but please give a nice round of applause.
Perfect. Thanks for the time, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.